My brothers and sisters in the light, there is a Hebrew phrase that when spoken just once with full understanding and conviction, breaks the chain of generational poverty that may have bound your family for decades or even centuries. Not weakens the chain, breaks it. Permanently, completely, irreversibly. Generational poverty is not merely a pattern of financial struggle that happens to repeat across generations. It is a spiritual inheritance, a curse that passes from parents to children to grandchildren like a dark heirloom that no one wants but everyone receives. It operates through spiritual mechanisms that natural efforts cannot address. You can work harder than your parents worked. You can be smarter with money than your grandparents were. You can do everything right that your ancestors did wrong. And the poverty can still follow you because you have inherited it spiritually, not just practically. The Essenes understood this reality deeply. They studied families across generations and observed that certain patterns of lack persisted regardless of individual choices or efforts. A family that had known poverty for 3 generations would continue knowing poverty into the 4th and 5th generations, even when individual members made dramatically different choices than their predecessors. Something invisible was operating, something that transcended personal behavior. Through intense prayer and study of the scriptures, the Essenes discovered the mechanism by which generational curses operate and, more importantly, the Hebrew phrase that breaks them. This phrase was reserved for the most serious spiritual bondages because it carries power that should not be used casually. When spoken with understanding, it severs spiritual connections that have bound families for generations. Today I am revealing this phrase to you. I am going to explain why generational poverty persists across family lines. I am going to teach you the exact Hebrew words that break the inheritance of lack, and I am going to show you how to speak this phrase once with the power and conviction that makes the breaking permanent. But I must warn you about something first. This is not a phrase to speak lightly or casually. It is not an affirmation to repeat daily like a mantra. It is a one-time declaration of spiritual authority that severs a generational connection. Speaking it without understanding or without conviction wastes its power. Speaking it correctly, just once, accomplishes what years of effort could not achieve. Let me explain how generational poverty operates spiritually so you understand what you are breaking. In Scripture, blessings and curses both have generational dimensions. The blessing given to Abraham extended to his descendants for generations. The curse upon certain bloodlines extended similarly. This is not arbitrary or unfair. It reflects the reality that families are spiritually connected across time in ways that modern individualism does not recognize. When poverty establishes itself in a family line, it does not merely affect the individual who first experienced it. It creates a spiritual groove, a pattern carved into the family's spiritual inheritance. Children born into that line are born into the groove. They inherit the pattern even if they never make the choices that created it. They find themselves struggling with the same financial challenges that plagued their parents and grandparents, often in eerily similar ways. This is why you might recognize patterns in your own family history. Perhaps every generation has struggled with the same type of financial problem. Perhaps prosperity that seemed within reach always slipped away at the last moment, generation after generation. Perhaps certain members of your family achieve success only to lose everything, repeating a pattern that occurred before they were born. These are not coincidences. They are evidence of generational inheritance operating through spiritual mechanisms. The good news is that what was spiritually established can be spiritually broken. The chain that binds your family to poverty is not unbreakable. It is not destiny. It is not the will of God for your bloodline. It is a spiritual pattern that can be severed by someone with the authority and knowledge to sever it. You have that authority, and I am about to give you that knowledge. Before I reveal the phrase, I need to pause and speak directly to your situation. You just learned that generational poverty operates through spiritual inheritance, that patterns of lack can pass from generation to generation regardless of individual choices, that your financial struggles may not be entirely your own, but may be inherited from ancestors you never knew. If your parents struggled financially and their parents struggled before them, If you have noticed patterns of lack that seem to repeat in your family despite different choices by different members. If prosperity seems to slip away from your family just when it appears within reach, generation after generation. This is not coincidence. This is not bad luck that happens to run in families. This is not destiny or fate or the permanent condition of your bloodline. This is generational poverty operating through spiritual mechanisms that can be broken, must be broken, and will be broken today if you speak the phrase I am about to teach you. Think about your family history. How many generations have struggled financially? How many of your ancestors knew poverty as their constant companion? How many of your relatives experienced the same patterns of lack that you experience, the same mysterious drain, the same elusive prosperity? You did not create this pattern, but you can end it. You can be the generation where the chain breaks. You can be the one who speaks the phrase that severs the inheritance of poverty and releases your children and grandchildren from a burden they did nothing to deserve. There is a complete protocol for breaking every generational pattern that has bound your family. The Essene Wealth Code contains this phrase along with 20 other practices that will sever unhealthy spiritual inheritances and establish new patterns of blessing for your bloodline. I have taught this phrase to thousands who recognize generational patterns in their families. I have watched people speak these words once with conviction and experience the breaking of chains that had bound their families for generations. The inheritance of poverty was severed. The pattern ended. A new generational trajectory began. If you remain silent, the chain continues. Your children will inherit what you inherited. Your grandchildren will struggle as your grandparents struggled. The pattern will persist because no one in your line had the knowledge and courage to break it. The link is in the description. The Essene Wealth Code. 21 days to break generational patterns and establish new spiritual inheritances for your family. Click. Read. Decide if you want to pass the chain to your descendants or be the generation that breaks it. Now let me reveal the Hebrew phrase. The phrase is, Ani Mafsik et Hashalshelet, lo od. Say it with me slowly. Ani Mafsik et Hashalshelet, lo od. Let me teach you the pronunciation piece by piece. Ani is pronounced ani. It means I or I am. This word establishes your identity as the one taking action, the one with authority to act. Mafsik is pronounced mafsik. It means stop or cease or break. This is an active verb indicating decisive action, not a passive hope, but an intentional severing. Et is pronounced ehg. It is a direct object marker that connects the verb to what is being stopped. It indicates that what follows is what you are breaking. Hashalshelet is pronounced ha-shal-shel-et. It means the chain. This word specifically refers to a chain of inheritance, a sequence of connected links passing from one generation to the next. Lo-od is pronounced lo-ohd. It means no more or never again. This phrase seals the breaking, declaring that what has been severed will not reconnect. Together, Ani Mafsik et Hashalshelet. Lo-od means I am breaking the chain. No more. Or more fully, I break the chain of generational inheritance. It ends here. It continues no longer. This phrase directly addresses the mechanism of generational poverty. You are not asking for the chain to be broken. You are breaking it yourself through the authority you carry as a child of God operating within your bloodline. You are the one with standing to act because you are part of the chain. And you are using that standing to sever what has bound your family for generations. Now let me teach you exactly how to speak this phrase with the power that makes the breaking permanent. First, prepare yourself spiritually before speaking. This is not a casual utterance. Take time to become quiet, to focus your mind, to acknowledge the seriousness of what you are about to do. Some people fast before speaking the phrase. Others spend time in prayer. At minimum, remove distractions and create a space of spiritual focus. Second, speak with your family lineage in mind. Before uttering the phrase, think about your parents and their financial struggles. Think about your grandparents and their poverty. Think about whatever you know of your ancestors and their patterns of lack. Bring the chain into your conscious awareness so that you know what you are breaking. Third, speak the phrase audibly and with authority. Ani Mafsik et hashalshelet. Lo od. These are not words to whisper timidly or mumble uncertainly. They are words to speak with the conviction of someone exercising spiritual authority. You have the right to break this chain. Speak like someone who knows they have that right. Fourth, speak once only. This is not a mantra to repeat. Speaking it multiple times actually weakens it, because repetition implies doubt that it worked the first time. Speak it once with full conviction and then stop. Trust that what you have spoken is accomplished. Fifth, seal the breaking with thanksgiving. After speaking the phrase, spend a moment in gratitude. Thank God that the chain is broken. Thank Him that your children will not inherit what you inherited. Thank Him that a new pattern begins with you. The thanksgiving seals the breaking and establishes the new trajectory. The phrase can be spoken at any time, but many find that dawn or sunset, the threshold times of day, carry particular power for generational work. Choose a time when you can be undistracted and fully present. If you are finding value in these ancient secrets, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and tap the notification bell. Every week, I reveal another practice from the caves of Qumran that can transform your life. And do something right now. In the comments below, type, I break the cycle. When you type this, you are committing to speak the Hebrew phrase and sever the chain of generational poverty in your family. Type it now. I break the cycle. Let me tell you about a woman named Grace who learned this phrase and what happened when she spoke it over her family line. Her story demonstrates that generational chains that have bound families for decades can be broken in a single moment of conviction. Grace was a middle-aged woman who had struggled financially her entire adult life despite making choices dramatically different from her parents. She was educated where her mother had been forced to drop out of school. She was careful with money where her relatives had been careless. She planned and saved where previous generations had lived paycheck to paycheck out of necessity and ignorance. Her mother had been poor due to circumstances largely outside her control, a single parent in an era when that status meant almost certain poverty. There had been no support systems, no child care assistance, no opportunities for advancement. Her mother had worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads, and still it was never enough. Grace remembered childhood as a constant anxiety about whether there would be enough, whether the landlord would be patient, whether the utilities would be shut off this month or next. Her grandmother had been poor because that was simply the lot of women in their community in that generation. Married young to a man who drank away his wages, widowed young with children to raise alone, she had known nothing but struggle from her youth until her death. Grace remembered her grandmother's hands, worn from decades of hard labor for minimal pay, and her eyes, tired from a lifetime of worry about provision. Her great-grandmother, from what Grace knew of family stories passed down through the generations, had known nothing but lack her entire life. Born into poverty in the old country, immigrated to America with nothing, worked herself to exhaustion for wages that barely sustained existence. She had died before Grace was born, but the stories painted a picture of relentless hardship from birth until death. 4 generations of poverty that Grace could trace with certainty, and likely more before that, lost to history but certainly present. The pattern was undeniable when she sat down and mapped her family tree. Every branch on her mother's side showed the same fruit of financial struggle, generation after generation, regardless of the specific circumstances or choices of individual members. Some of her relatives had made poor choices, certainly, but others had made excellent choices and still struggled. Some had worked hard, others had worked harder. Some had been fortunate in love, others had been abandoned or widowed. The circumstances varied dramatically across the generations. But the outcome was always the same: poverty, struggle, lack, insufficiency, never enough, always behind, forever catching up but never arriving. Grace had determined from a young age that she would be different. She would break the pattern through sheer determination and better choices. She had gotten more education than her mother, putting herself through college while working multiple jobs. She had made better financial choices than many of her relatives, studying personal finance and applying every principle she learned. She had worked harder, saved more carefully, planned more diligently than anyone in her family history. By every measure of conventional wisdom, she should have achieved prosperity. She had done everything right. She had made none of the mistakes that had trapped previous generations. She was the success story, the one who got out, the proof that the cycle could be broken through effort and intelligence. Yet she found herself struggling with the same essential challenges that had plagued her mother and grandmother before her. The specific circumstances were different, certainly. She had a professional job rather than domestic work. She lived in a decent apartment rather than a tenement. She had health insurance and a retirement account. The surface looked different, but the underlying pattern was identical. Money was always tight no matter how carefully she managed her income. Opportunities that seemed certain would collapse at the last moment. Job promotions that went to others. Business ventures that failed unexpectedly. Unexpected expenses appeared with suspicious regularity, as if an invisible force was monitoring her accounts and deploying challenges precisely calculated to drain whatever she had accumulated. She recognized the pattern because she had seen it operate in her mother's life and her grandmother's life. The specifics changed across generations, but the essence remained. Money came in and money went out, and somehow the going always exceeded the coming regardless of the amounts involved. She earned more than her mother ever had. She struggled exactly as much. When she first learned about generational poverty as a spiritual inheritance rather than merely a practical pattern, something shifted fundamentally in her understanding. She had always blamed her circumstances on some combination of bad luck and personal failings she could not quite identify. Now she saw her situation through an entirely different lens. The chain that bound her was not forged by her own choices. It had been forged generations before her birth, by circumstances and choices and curses she knew nothing about, and passed down through her family line like an unwanted inheritance that she had received without her knowledge or consent. She was not failing despite her good choices. She was carrying a burden she had never chosen to pick up and did not know how to put down. She decided to speak the Hebrew phrase over her family line. Unlike casual spiritual practices she had tried before, she took this matter with complete seriousness. She spent 3 full days in prayer and partial fasting before speaking the words. She searched her memory for every story she knew about her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, all the women in her line who had known poverty as their constant companion through no fault of their own. She thought about her grandmother's worn hands and tired eyes. She thought about her mother's constant anxiety and exhaustion. She thought about a great-grandmother she had never met, but whose hardship had echoed down through generations to touch even her own life. On the morning of the 3rd day, at dawn when the first light was entering her small apartment, she stood alone in her living room. She thought about the chains stretching back through generations, link connected to link, connected to link, connected to link, binding her family to lack and insufficiency. She felt the weight of an inheritance that she had carried her entire adult life without knowing she was carrying it. Then she spoke the words aloud into the quiet morning air, Ani Mafsik et Hashalshalet. Lo od. She spoke them once only, as she had been instructed, but she spoke them with a conviction and volume that surprised her own ears. The sound of her voice declaring the breaking of a generational chain felt powerful in a way that no affirmation or prayer she had ever spoken had felt. Something was happening, she sensed, though she could not see it or prove it. Then silence filled her apartment. She waited in that silence, not sure what she was waiting for. There was no thunder from heaven, no visible sign of spiritual activity, no dramatic experience of supernatural intervention. Just silence and the ordinary sounds of morning beginning outside her window. Traffic starting to move on the street below. Birds beginning to call in the trees. She sealed the breaking with thanksgiving as she had been taught. thanking God that the chain was broken even though she had no evidence yet that anything had actually changed. Then she made her morning coffee and went about her day, wondering privately whether she had just performed a meaningless ritual or something genuinely transformative. The first sign came 3 days later. A medical debt she had owed for nearly 5 years was unexpectedly forgiven. The hospital sent a letter explaining that they were writing off certain old debts as part of a new charitable policy for accounts meeting certain criteria. The amount forgiven was nearly $2,000 that she had been slowly, painfully paying down for years with no end in sight. The second sign came the following week. Her employer announced a corporate restructuring that usually meant layoffs and anxiety. Instead, Grace found herself promoted to a position she had not applied for, with a salary increase of nearly 20%. Her supervisor said she had been selected because of qualities and contributions he had noticed over her years of service that made her ideal for the new role. The third sign came the following month. Her car, which had been a constant source of expensive repairs for years, following the exact pattern she had watched operate in her mother's life with different vehicles, passed its annual inspection without needing any work whatsoever. The mechanic seemed as surprised as she was, commenting that cars her age usually needed something. My brothers and sisters in the light, you now have what Grace discovered. Ani Mafsik et Hashalshelet. Lo od, I break the chain. No more. Speak at once with conviction over your family line. Be the generation where the inheritance of poverty ends and a new inheritance of blessing begins. If you are ready for complete transformation, the Essene Wealth Code will guide you through this phrase and 20 other practices that will sever every unhealthy inheritance and establish new patterns for your descendants. The link is in the description. Before you leave, type one more time. I break the cycle. Let this be your commitment to speak the phrase and end what has bound your family for generations. May the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob break every chain that binds your bloodline. May generational poverty end in your generation. May your children inherit blessing where you inherited lack. May a new pattern begin today that continues for generations to come. Ani Mafsik et Hashalshelet. Lo od. Go in peace. Go in power. Go in prosperity. Until next time, this is Rabbi Enoch, keeper of the scrolls, servant of the light. Shalom.